Hello, my name is Bryan, and today we are going to be asking the question, what actually happened at the Big Bang? How did this all begin? Welcome. My name is Bryan. I follow Jesus, and I believe you can do that with empathy and without checking your brain at the door. Today, we are starting at the very beginning.
Let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start.
We're asking the question, how did this all begin? How did we get here? How did our universe happen? What actually happened at the Big Bang? And this is such an important question for us to ask because what we believe happens here sets the trajectory for the rest of our lives. So with that being said, let's go. We're going to start with a segment of scripture. Now, before you write me off as like a religious nut job or something, I'm going to make the case that you don't have to check your brain at the door to believe this. Now, Genesis 1, it's the very first opening chapter of the Bible, the first story on page 1. And in Genesis 1, we read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And I think it's really interesting that Scripture doesn't start off trying to prove that there is a God, but it assumes that there is a God. The rest of Genesis 1 breaks up the story of creation into 6 days. Now, there's a big debate about whether this is literal or metaphorical. I'm not going to get into all that. But I do want to highlight something from this segment of scripture. It is such a special, beautiful, mysterious piece of poetry. The first 3 days in Genesis 1 is like the canvas of a painting. And then the second 3 days, God fills that canvas. So day 1, he separates light from darkness. He says, "Let there be light," and separates light from darkness. On day 2, he separates the heavens and the earth. And on day 3, he separates land and sea. So that is the canvas. He organizes on days 1 through 3, and then he fills on days 4 through 6. So on day 4, he fills the heavens with the stars and the sun and the moon. We even read, "Let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years." On day 5, God fills the sea with fish, and he fills the air with birds. And then on day 6, he fills the dry land with creatures, animals, and human beings. And after all of these things, after every day, here's what we read: God saw that it was good. So I think people generally have two big problems with this text. The first problem is they have a problem with the timeline. Most people who believe this is a literal 6-day creation also believe the earth is somewhere around 6 to 10,000 years old. Now on Google right now, if you Google how old is the earth, you're going to get the number 13.8 billion years. Now, that's a pretty big gap. That's not like getting carded at the age of 37. We're talking about 6,000 versus 13.8 billion. 6 bands versus 13 billy. It's a big problem. The second big problem that people have, and this is the one I'm going to spend the most time on, is did God actually create this? Did a divine being speak this into existence, or did it all happen naturally? Now here's why I want to spend the most time on this, because if a divine being created our universe, he could have taken any amount of time he wanted. He could have taken 6,000 years. He could have taken 6 billion years. He could have taken 6,000 years and made it look like 6 billion years. If you believe the first verse in the Bible, it makes the rest of the Bible really easy to believe. Now, I would say that the greatest argument for God creating this world is that something exists. Yes, something exists. And I think we can pretty much all get on that page. No matter what your belief, you can believe that something exists. According to the law of the conservation of energy, and according to its definition on Wikipedia, the energy of a system is constant. It can be transferred, but not created or destroyed. So what this means is that the energy in our universe, it can be moved around. Different things can have different amounts of energy at different times, but we can't create or destroy energy. In other words, something outside of the system itself had to start the universe in motion. And the reality is that more than just something exists. Something incredibly vast and complex exists. 100 billion galaxies exist. The Milky Way exists. The Earth exists. Seahorses exist. The ocean exists. Our eyeball exists. Our brain exists. These things are infinitely more complex than anything that we could imagine or study. Now, I'm surrounded by a lot of really cool artists. And when I hear the music of Windwards or Sky Club or TJ Carroll or Ayomilly or Golden Goose, I don't think that music must have just naturally happened. I don't think, man, this spontaneously erupted and ended up in my eardrums. No, I assume that there is a creator. Like I'm sitting at this table right now. And if you think about it, this table is actually pretty simple as compared to other things in the universe. It's wood, there's some metal, there's some nuts and bolts and screws and nails. But even something as simple as this table, I know that someone dreamed it up. Someone thought about it, someone planned it, someone implemented that plan into action. If something is so simple as a table had to be dreamed up, what about something as vast and as complex as our universe? But here's the thing, don't just take my word for it. Here's a few thoughts. Listen to Mark Clark. Astrophysicists tell us that there were around 122 variables that would have had to line up in precise values in order for our universe to come into existence. Physician and geneticist Francis Collins says there are 15 constants. If any one of these constants were off, even by 1 part in a million, or in some cases by 1 part in a million, the universe could not have actually come to the point where we see it. Matter would not have been able to coalesce. There would have been no galaxies, stars, planets, or people. Astronomer Fred Hoyle says a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics as well as the chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. In other words, this could not have happened by accident. Someone had to dream it up. And maybe you don't believe in Jesus. Maybe you're far from embracing the story of Christianity. But I hope you can at least get on the page to understand that because everything exists, someone had to create that which exists. Scripture is one story, and it's a story that ultimately points to Jesus. In every video, we look at how the segment of Scripture we studied connects to the whole story. Obviously, this is an important segment of Scripture. It is the very first opening part of the story. But here's what we read in Romans, really interesting stuff. In Romans 1, we read God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that humans are without excuse. In other words, what we see points to what we can't see. The visible creation points to an invisible God. Creation speaks to its creator. And here's what we learn about Jesus in Colossians 1. We read, all things were created through Jesus and for Jesus. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Creation was made by Jesus, for Jesus. We exist for his glory. Thanks for watching this video. In every video, we look at one segment of scripture. We address the sometimes very valid problems that people have with that segment of scripture. And we look at how that segment of scripture connects to the whole story. If you want to follow along on the journey, you can always subscribe. We'll be releasing a video every single Saturday. Share it with your friends if you'd like. We would love that as we start this journey. Now for a blessing to close. May the God who said, "Let there be light," bring light, hope, and peace into your life through Jesus. Peace.